have been both old and new names of the community who have been part of so much and making what we have today. The Edgewater Adas today is not the same community it was even 10 years ago. It continues to grow and develop, and a lot of the ability for us to change and grow and develop and move on is a real reflection of certain things that Harvey took from people who came before him, like Moshe Borenstein and a number of others who are there at the same time, the ability to give space for others. All too often you'd have a person who has the ability that Harvey had and put so much into the community as Harvey did, and yet are unable to let go and let other people take the space and take the leadership and move on and do so. And he was able to do that. One of the tremendous gifts that he had in being able to do so, together with everything else that he did. I hope that us coming together at this point is a true nechama for you, Barbara, for your children, for the family in general, to know and be aware that, yes, you've gone it's already a good few years ago, and things have changed here, but be aware that you haven't been forgotten here. The commitment that you've made and everything you did over the years continues to flourish in the Edgewater Adas, continues to flourish in our community. And we go to Mechael El Choyel only because we build on the work that you, together with your friends who are gathered here today, and those who are with us and those who are, Leolenu, sadly no longer with us, were able to do all those years to make our community continue to grow. It's an opportunity. Thank you for everything you've done. Opportunity to express our Akaras Hatayv, express our Akaras Hatayv to Harvey for everything he did over all the years, and to make sure that it remains a memory, that it's not only a history, but it's a memory for us. In fact, I think that the distinction between history and memory is an insight that I first heard from Harvey himself, that we Jews don't have history, because history is not a Jewish word. We have a zeicher, we have a memory. It defines who we are. It's not just dry facts from the past. And that was an expression. And what we have today is a zeicher, is a memory of Harvey, and what continues with us. Thank you for this opportunity. And Be'ezus Hashem, may we continue to grow and develop until the time that Batik Nesias about the Midrashis Shababavel, that places of davening and learning in Bavel are brought to Eretz Yisrael, come to Eretz Yisrael with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, when the Pasuk tells us, V'kitzu v'raninu sheichnei ofar, that Be'ezus Hashem, that even though those who now dwell on earth will wake up, and we will all be able to join together at the Edgewater Adas Yisrael in Yerushalayim Mir HaKodesh with Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mehera v'yameinu. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi, very much. I'm going to ask the next speaker. I'm struggling. I think it's Morton. I don't have the full name, but if you can, I think Morton Moser, who is a former chairman, now living in Israel. And if you can unmute yourself, I've asked you to unmute.
You've got the wrong Martin.
Actually, Martin Steinhardt, sorry. Yes. I don't see Martin Moser, so I'm going to move on to Okay, Stuart, if I hand over to yourself then.
Hi, is Martin speaking or you want me to?
At the minute, if you can come in now.
Okay, hi. Hi, Gemar Chatzima Tova, everybody. Good to be participating in this very special event. You know, every year around Rosh Hashanah time, the Jewish press in Israel and the UK publish lists of the most influential Jews in the world. When I was asked to participate in this tribute, it occurred to me that if a study was to be made about the residents of Edgware who have made the most significant contribution to the growth of traditional Jewish life in the area during the last 60 years, Harvey would undoubtedly rank very highly. Harvey was an Edgware original, having been born in 1940. And until Harvey and Barbara made Aliyah in 2008, he lived in Edgware all his life. That's some 68 years. My family arrived in the area in 1951, and I first became friendly with Harvey and his brother Tony in the mid-50s. In those days, Edgware, Jewishly speaking, was pretty much a backwater. The main shul was the United, the Ashuran was in the wrong part of town, and the Adas often struggled for a minyan, even on Shabbat. I remember as a kid having to knock on doors on Friday night to get a minyan. In fact, in all, there were maybe some 20 or 30 Shomer Shabbat families in the whole of the Edgware area, and these were dispersed between the three shuls. So for a boy growing up in Edgware, looking for youth activities, there was the Jewish Lads Brigade and the 11th Edgware Jewish Scout Troop, and with a very few kids who wanted a Shabbat afternoon social, there was only Jewish youth study groups, which met in different people's houses. Because the number of traditionally minded kids was so small, this group catered for a combined age range between 14 to 18. It was at study group that I think I first met Harvey and Tony. I was the only kid in my year from Edgware who went to Hasmonean, whereas both Harvey and subsequently his two brothers, Tony and Michael, went to a posh school, City of London, where they all got scholarships. Harvey stood out. He was always exceptionally bright. He had an inquiring mind, a passion for knowledge, and enormous powers of concentration. Then in 1958, a charismatic, brilliant, intellectual, Gateshead-educated rabbi, namely Rabbi Getzel Ellenson Zatzal, was appointed Rav of the Ashurim. Harvey was very soon drawn to him and became his leading talmid in the area. The Friday night Parshat HaShavua Shiurim at the Rav's home attracted a core of local youngsters, and Rabbi Ellenson encouraged Harvey, together with his friend Alan York, to set up a new youth group for observant-minded young people in the area, which they called the Hebron Jewish Youth Club. Harvey became chairman, he was always chairman, of any organization eventually that he joined, and very soon Hebron started to attract large numbers of kids and expanded its activities to include not just Shabbat afternoon meetings, but also weekday sessions, including debates, discussion groups, table tennis, with Rabbi Ellenson as the mentor. Now, this was around 1958 to 59, when Harvey was 18 or so. And about this time, Harvey's passion for Torah studies was growing, and he asked Rabbi Ellenson to start a Gemara share for youngsters. Apparently, this is according to Alan York, Rabbi Ellenson replied that he does not teach beginners, and he recommended Harvey to approach Rabbi Heschel Zatzal, esteemed Rav of the Adas. And I think this was the trigger for Harvey starting his long association with EAYC. In the meantime, Hebron Youth Club was so successful that it started to attract teenagers from outside Edgware, including one young lady from Woodside Park in the person of Barbara Langer. Now, Harvey had bought a motorbike, and when a year or so later, Barbara was sighted riding pillion on Harvey's motorbike, it was clear that they had become an item. The success of Hebron caught the attention of the organizers of Sinai Youth Club in Hendon, and the two groups, under the leadership of Harvey, with Leonard Finn and Leslie Hyman, arranged joint summer and winter camps under the banner of Sinai Hebron. Until this time, there was little awareness in Hendon and Golders Green of Jewish life in Edgware, and I'm sure that because of the friendships created at these camps, Edgware, a few years later, started to attract families from outside the area. In the meantime, in 1962, Harvey qualified as a dentist, and shortly after, Harvey and Barbara were married. And on a personal note, my parents, Aleichem Hashalom, had the pleasure of making them Sheva Brachot, and when Suzanne and I married in 1971, Harvey and Barbara returned the compliment. It was clear at this time that the Jewish character of Edgware was rapidly changing. The influx of newly marrieds moving into the area needed a shul. And which shul did they opt to join? The Adas. From having been a largely dormant community, the Adas was now beginning to mushroom, and Harvey and Barbara were key figures in this growth. As Harvey's dental practice developed, you would think that with his professional and family responsibilities, his aspirations for Torah studies, and his thirst for general knowledge, he had plenty to keep him busy. Nevertheless, Harvey was a perpetual student, and he couldn't resist the opportunity to participate in the Brain of Britain competition, which was broadcast on BBC Radio 4 and the BBC World Service. Now, I don't know what triggered Harvey's interest in becoming a mohel. Maybe it was because the newly marrieds of Edgware were establishing young families and there was no mohel in the Edgware and the wider locale. I recall one Shabbat that Harvey had a bris to carry out in Watford, and he asked me to accompany him on the walk, and it was quite a trek. But Harvey was not deterred by distance. His reputation as a mohel spread far and wide, and over the years he must have carried out hundreds, if not thousands, of briton. Then in spring of 1972, at the age of 32, Harvey was struck down with rapid kidney failure. Suzanne and I recall visiting him in the Hammersmith Hospital when she was very pregnant with our first child. By the time our son Jonathan was born in August 1972, Harvey was on dialysis, and our son's Brit was Harvey's first since his diagnosis. The next 7 years were very tough for Harvey, Barbara, and the children. They were able to install a home dialysis machine in one of their bedrooms, and we often visited Harvey while he was undergoing the process. Then in 1979, brother Tony donated a kidney to Harvey prior to Tony making Aliyah. This selfless gift gave Harvey a life he would otherwise never have had. Now, by the 80s, Harvey's learning had grown exponentially. He was always happy to give a devout Torah whenever called upon. And on Shabbat afternoons, Harvey would give a Gemara shir to about 8 of us guys from the Adas. These were the years when Harvey was chairman of the Adas, and others are speaking and will be speaking about his work as the shul's lay leader. As a very old friend of Harvey, I just wanted to paint a brief picture of Harvey's earlier years in Edgware and to describe the pioneering role he played in laying the foundations for the area to become an established and admired Makom Torah. As it says in the concluding passage of Masechta Brachot, when alluding to the peace that by their learning Torah scholars bring to the world, Rav Shalom Banaich, abundant will be the peace of your children. Al tikri bonoich, elo bonoich, do not read bonoich, your children, but read bonoich, your builders. Harvey was not just a true ben of Edgware, a son of Edgware, he was indeed a boner, a dedicated builder of Yiddishkeit in the Adas Shul, in Edgware, and in the wider community. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am going to welcome now back Morten Moser. Just give me a second as we find Morten, and I'm going to ask Morten to unmute, and we're going to spotlight Morten. Morten, you're still on mute, so if you just unmute yourself. Yes, Morten, go for it.
I'm unmuted. Barbara, you actually, Caroline, who was born and bred in Edgware, knew the Brown boys, as she refers to them. This goes back nearly 70 years. First the Edgware Cheder, And then Friday nights, as Stuart has just said, at Rabbi Ellenson's. I am relatively new to the area, just came to Edgware. Caroline and I married, and I moved into Edgware just 50 years ago. So I'm a new boy. And I joined the Adas, and I knew Tony and Harvey, very active in the community. And I will always remember them, you know, Harvey and Tony, being very active in the community and helping newcomers like myself. Now, the thing is that when someone of Harvey's age group passes away, it brings mortality to the forefront of people of our age. And really, you know, we do something of our memory goes with Harvey's passing, the memory of being around with Harvey Brown. I still remember when he was very, very ill in shul, coming to shul every day, and he made a white tablecloth look coloured. He was without colour. And I still remember visiting him in hospital after the kidney transplant. And I know it sounds funny, but one of the things on his mind was, I'll be able to eat schmaltz herring at Kiddush now. I mean, that's things people think about, you know, and he made a marvelous recovery. His colour came back, and then he started coming to shul once again on a regular basis. When he used to come to shul, he had that smile on his face. He was so kind. People don't realize how kind he was. One Friday afternoon, my mother-in-law, Shalom, broke her denture. She phones me up. Who can I turn to? I turned to Harvey. Harvey said, "Come round now." The surgery is closed, but he opened it up and he repaired the denture there and then. And my mother-in-law was able to eat with us over Shabbat. That's the kind of guy Harvey was, a kind, gentle person. When, you know, he was such a brainy guy, and Stuart's already mentioned Brain of Britain. We all listened in on Radio 4. It was wonderful, but unfortunately, Harvey didn't become the brain of Britain, but he certainly was the brain of Edgware. He really answered some questions, much like University Challenge, which I managed to answer 2 or 3. Harvey would have been really great on University Challenge. The Stuart mentioned, or the rabbi mentioned, the lights. We used to know Harvey used to come into shul with a big smile on his face. And he used to turn on the lights around the bimah, the 4 lights, which was a lovely thing. It's a shame we don't have a bimah like that in the new shul, but there you go. I used to turn on the lights, and I used to be very pleased because as Gabba, I didn't have to think. Cohen Levy, Harvey, I was happy, the Kahila were happy, and the father of the baby boy was very, very happy. Everybody was happy. Harvey made people happy. And, you know, this Barbara, because of Harvey's popularity and everybody loved him, we couldn't get to the Shiva. My daughter managed, I couldn't even get on the phone to you. So Barbara, in spite of this Mageva, let's hope that's over. Let me wish you and all the family that from now on you should only have semachot, and the whole of Israel should be at one in peace. Amen. Daniel Gillis is speaking, can't hear him.
Yeah, I think I'm on next.
You?
Yes.
Okay, if it does time out, then please rejoin the meeting.
Right.
I can't see your face. Can you see the bottom of you?
Right. I first met Harvey when I was at university. There was an organisation called Yavne, founded by a group of observant students and postgraduates in London. It organised seminars and discussion evenings. This was in the early 1960s, with distinguished guest speakers as well as contributions by students. I had been roped in as one of the very few orthodox students studying psychology at that time. I remember that we had one evening session dealing with some aspect of Jewish medical ethics. I think it was contraception. And the student speaker was none other than Harvey, who was then still at dental school. He gave an impressive, well-researched halachic analysis. And at the end of the meeting, we started chatting. We found we had a lot in common, even though we came from quite different backgrounds. So when Judy and I moved into Edgware after we married, we just naturally became friends with Harvey and Barbara, a friendship that lasted for 45 years. And I was then privileged to work with Harvey on some major shul projects. Our shul, the Edgware Das, owes an enormous debt of gratitude to Harvey for his overall input and presence, but there were some specific things that I want to talk about this evening. Last year, I was involved with writing the history of the Edgware Das, which we then published as a commemorative brochure for the 80th anniversary dinner we held last November. That seems like a very long time ago. As part of the research, I went down together with Michael Rudin to Southampton University to examine their archives, which hold the papers of Rabbi Solomon Schonfeld. And we made an interesting discovery that I don't think anybody today would have known about. In the early 1970s, there was a terrible dispute between the shul and Rabbi Schonfeld and the Adath Yisrael parent body as to the ownership of the land where the old shul was situated at 261 Hale Lane. And there was a real danger that the shul would simply be closed and disbanded, and for various reasons, the dispute escalated up to the English courts. We discovered in those papers that Harvey, together with his brother Tony, were at the forefront of defending the shul. There were injunctions raised on both sides, contempt of court proceedings, the shul officers were being sued, and Harvey's name appears on quite a number of the legal documents we saw as the named person in the legal actions as the shul officer acting on behalf of the shul. He was still quite a young man at the time, but he obviously loved our shul, and at great personal risk to himself from a legal point of view, he helped to ensure that the shul survived as the independent kehillah that we have today. So we owe him a debt of gratitude for that alone. Second thing I wanted to highlight is when Harvey took over the chairmanship of the shul in the early 1980s, after his transplant, when he was back to his old self. The shul in the old premises at 261 Hale Lane had very poor facilities and also insufficient capacity for the growing membership. Harvey took it upon himself to discuss alternative ways of improving things with our architect Ronald Rabson, and came up with the plan to build a hall adjacent to the old building which would house our ladies as well as cater for functions. And it was his enthusiasm and persistence that galvanized us. I was shul treasurer at the time. We formed a team of fundraisers and we raised the money from our members, and the hall was built in just a few months. The hall was named the Rabbi Jacob Heschel Hall at Harvey's suggestion to commemorate a much revered former Rav for whom Harvey had great respect and affection. So during Harvey's chairmanship, the shul premises became a more attractive venue and the membership of the shul expanded. And the other thing I want to talk about is Harvey and the Edgware Eruv, which Rabbi Lieberman has already mentioned. A bit of history again. It was in 1998 that Rabbi Lieberman called a meeting for those Adath members interested in an Eruv in Edgware. The Rav had realized that the then proposed Eruv in northwest London might have a serious negative impact on the future of the Edgware Das. Observant young couples would prefer Hendon to Edgware. The Rav had a preliminary plan that needed validating and then implementing, and Harvey took up the challenge. He volunteered to become chairman of a shul Eruv committee. I was privileged to act as secretary to the committee. Little did Harvey know at the time that this was going to be an 8-year slog before the Eruv became a reality. I can bear witness that under his guidance and leadership and unfailing courtesy, never mind all the frustrations that came up, the committee worked together harmoniously under his leadership over those long years. At the Kiddush the shul made to mark the successful completion of the Eruv in 2006, Harvey publicly thanked all the members of the committee individually for their contributions and modestly suggested that his own contribution was merely to sign all the official documents, the planning applications and licenses, etc. He did much more than that. He schlepped out with the rest of us in all weathers to look at walls and fences. He attended interminable meetings with council officers. He sat down with Diane Ehrentreu to discuss finer points of Hilchot Eruvin. But if I can single out just one specific contribution, it was to bring all the other Edgware shuls alongside us. We didn't want the problems which plagued the Hendon Eruv. Rabbi Lieberman dealt with the other Edgware rabbis, but Harvey had the harder job of dealing with the other Edgware honorary officers. And by dint of his charm and persistence, he persuaded them all to support us wholeheartedly. And in some cases, that did some doing. He even went to chat with the local Reform rabbi, who told him that an Eruv in Edgware was a good idea. With the Eruv finally operational, Harvey continued to chair the cross-communal Eruv committee across all the shuls. All the shuls accepted him because of the respect he generated throughout the wider Edgware community, through his warmth of personality, his smile, his common sense, his Torah learning, and I will remember him for all those things. At the Kiddush, the shul gave for Harvey and Barbara when they left Edgware to go on Aliyah, I was invited to speak about Harvey and his work for the Eruv. I said then, and it is even more true today, that through his efforts, he had changed the lives and in particular the Shabbat lifestyles of hundreds of families now living in Edgware. As they said of, I think, Christopher Wren, si monumentum requiris circum spice. If you seek a monument, look about you. Harvey's memorial, just look around Edgware on a Shabbat. Harvey gave us so much. Tehei Zichro Baruch.
Thank you, Ali, very much. I'm going to welcome Jeremy Brown, who is Harvey's eldest son, living in the USA. We're just going to cross over to Jeremy now. And Jeremy, you are ready.
Okay. Can I have a verbal that you can hear me? Or a wave?
You can see him.
Okay. Good. Thank you, everybody. When we were sorting out Dad's library in Israel a couple of months ago, there were books that I didn't take because they were duplicates of things that I already owned. I mean, really, did I need a fifth set of Shas to find a place on our already overcrowded bookshelves? But there was one set, 5 small brown volumes, that I set my eyes on, and I knew immediately that I would take them should my siblings agree, which they did. It is a set of the Torah Tamima by the great Rabbi Yechiel Michael Epstein. Now, although I already owned my own copy, I moved those to the back of the shelf to create space for the new edition. And this is what the volume looks like. Some of you might remember my father having this on his stender in front of him. You see, those brown volumes were the earliest memories I have of the Edgware Das, or better, they were some of the earliest memories I have of Dad sitting in shul and following along at his own, in his own rather peculiar chumash. Now, the Torah Tamira recites all the places that a pasuk is quoted in the Talmud or the Midrash, and provides an explanation as to why this particular verse led the Talmud or the Midrash to its conclusions. As a result, there are many pages on which there is but a single line of text from the Chumash, and the rest of the page is filled with citations and explanations, all in increasingly small print. If you were to keep up with the laning, therefore, you had to turn the pages very quickly. And there is the memory, my dad turning the pages of his peculiar Chumash very quickly, while everyone else seemed to do so at a more leisurely pace. It was always a mystery to me as to why Dad chose this Chumash to follow along. I could have asked him, but I didn't. It took many years for me to figure it out, and many more years for me to buy my own set. But rather than just follow along, Dad wanted to dig a little deeper. He wasn't just content with Rashi. He wanted to read and understand how the rabbis of the Talmud and Midrash interpreted a pasuk. I had seen no one else turn the pages so quickly, but Dad knew that by taking a little extra time and reading that little print, he would come away enriched. But then that is not all. He would very often share what he had learned that Shabbat morning, either with us, his family, or with his friends who would attend his weekly Shabbat shiurim. So I brought that Torah Tamima back with me to America, returning just 4 days before my father died. And even though we already owned one, because it reminded me of a special time many, many years ago, of a Shabbat in shul in the Edgware Das, and of Dad's unquenching thirst for knowledge. Now, my memories of the Adas have perhaps faded a little, and I understand that you are now in a building I once knew as a church. But the shul, for me and for my family, was a familiar, warm place, even if, as a child, I didn't always follow along or understand much of the service. And for those of you who disciplined me at the time, I'm grateful. It was only years later that I started to appreciate the impact of Dad's role in the shul. Now, I have a very bad memory for faces and names, which makes me a rather bad gabbai, but I recall Dad on Simchas Torah, standing by the Aron Kodesh in the Edgware Das and calling the men up for their hakafah without needing to consult the small blue box that contained the index cards on which was written their Hebrew names. I look back on that feat of memory with some amazement, but I don't think that Dad could do that because he had a particularly good memory, even though certainly he did. I think he could do that because he showed up and learned people's Hebrew names by repetition, and because he cared. We have heard how Dad shaped the shul in his own quiet way, how he influenced others without himself standing out, how he chaired the shul's board for what was it, a decade, how he was persuaded to chair the Eruv committee. All this is true, and you are sitting in your new expanded shul in no small measure to him, and of course the many others who played a role. All this, of course, was despite his own long illness and his time-consuming commitment as a Moel. But I want to focus now on some of Dad's personal qualities by looking at two passages of Gemara. The first is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf 88. Ezehu ben olam haba, anvatan v'shafel berech, shayaf ayel shayaf v'nafik, v'goris bo'araisa tadira v'lomachzik tibusa l'nafshe. Who is one who is destined to place in the world to come? It is one who is modest and humble, who bows and enters when he enters and exits, and who studies Torah regularly, and yet does not take credit for himself. This strikes me as the very essence of Dad's approach to life, to study, and to communal responsibility. He was quiet and modest, never one for the spotlight, and perhaps it is precisely because of this that he was able to get so much done here in the shul that he loved. He was a modest person who studied regularly and never ever wanted to be in the spotlight, or as the Gemara put it, lo machzik tivusa lenafshe. He didn't take credit for himself. He didn't chair the Eruv committee. He just signed the official documents. There's a second Gemara that also speaks of Dad's personality, this one from Psochim, Daf Kuf Yud Gimel. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shlocha min nachalei ha'olam haba. There are three people, said Rabbi Yochanan, who inherit the world to come. Hadar be'eretz Yisrael, someone who lives in Israel. Hamagadel banav l'talmud Torah, someone who raises his children to be able to engage in Torah study. V'hamavdil al hayayin b'motzei Shabbat, and somebody who makes kiddush, who makes havdalah over wine on the conclusion of Shabbat. Hadar be'eretz Yisrael. Mom and Dad certainly fulfilled that dream to live in Israel some 12 years ago, and I know for at least 6 or 7 of them, Dad was in good health, and I think he could not have been happier at the good fortune, or really the hard work that had brought him to an apartment in Jerusalem with his children and grandchildren, with shiurim aplenty, and with Mom there by his side to enjoy everything that retirement could offer. V'hamagadel banav l'talmud Torah, someone who raises his children to be able to learn. Now, the Talmud doesn't say that you have to have children who are actually involved in Torah study, only that you educate them to be able to do so. You as a parent have the responsibility to provide an education for your children. How they turn out, that's not up to you, but you have that responsibility, and Mom and Dad certainly did that. They provided each of us, their children, with the opportunity to learn Torah. They sent us to Israel, even helping me return to yeshiva for a second year of the middle of my medical school studies. And of course, Dad did so much not only for his children, but for the builders of the community through shiurim that he gave for years. I'm told, by the way, that he gave the first shiur that opened the first Tikkun Leil on Shavuot. And it was he who organized that first Tikkun Leil. But what about that third quality? Hamavdil al hayayin b'motzei Shabbat. Someone who makes havdalah on wine on Motzei Shabbat. Why on earth would that be one of the 3 features that Rabbi Yochanan says are essential if someone is to inherit the world to come? Well, the Gemara goes on to explain that it means the Meshayer Nikidusha La'avdalta. It means that when a person makes Kiddush on Shabbat morning, he leaves some wine over. And Tosfos explains Shemonea Shtiaso B'Shvil Havdalah. He actually deliberately prevents himself from drinking so that he'll have some wine left over for Havdalah. Still, why would that be such a valuable act that it bequeaths the title Menacholei Ha'olam Haba, one who inherits the world to come? And here, with a lump in my throat and some strange irony, I will share the very explanation that my father told me about this piece of Gemara. It means, Dad said, that you are always thinking about the future and about what you could do to make that future a little better. So at Kiddush on Shabbat morning, you are making sure that there will be enough wine for the next act that requires it, Havdalah. Hold back, plan ahead, think about the future, even when the present seems good enough. These 2 Gemaras describe the qualities that ensure a place in the world to come. One becomes worthy of a place in the world to come by being fully engaged, not in that world, but in this world. By studying, yes, but also by planning ahead and being part of the Jewish future, and by never, ever making those efforts about you. That, I think, is how Dad acted for his 4+ decades of work for this shul and its community. That's how I think he should be remembered. And may that memory serve not only as a blessing, but also as an inspiration. Get involved, do so in a quiet way, and plan for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, very much. I'm going to pass over to Michael Steele, former chairman of EAYC. Michael?
Yes, can you hear me? I'm unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're slightly, yeah.
Personal recollection, I'm batting third or fourth. The recollections have already been given, but Harvey, we share a number of connections, not necessarily that close, but a number of connections over many years. But I was brought up in Edgware. And I stayed in Edgware until I was married in the 1970s. But I went to school, which is now on the site of Betschvidler. And I was also taken by us in the very early 1950s. I was 4 years old, I think. Would have been 1955, so I his attendance there. But I also knew Harvey's father from Edgware United because he sat in the same block as my father and your. And I might be corrected about this. Tony and Michael might be able to confirm this, but I think I remember Harvey's grandfather. I was a very young man, if I remember him correctly. He wore a bowler hat, had a walrus moustache, and spoke in some sort of foreign language, which was probably Yiddish. Much later on, of course, I got to know Harvey.
Michael, your internet's not so great. It keeps coming and going. I'm going to see if we can just come back to Michael in a second. And I'm just going to, Michael, if you can just try your internet and try and speak again.
Is that any better?
Yeah, if you just turn off your camera for us, and then maybe that'll give you more bandwidth.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, camera. Right, camera is switched off.
Okay.
And Harvey, he was already, I think, well into dentistry school when I had Chevron Sinai. I got the benefit of that, the benefit that he and many others had started. Later on, after I was married, my wife Hilary became friendly with Barbara when they were both teachers at Hasmonean High School for Girls. He was also dentist to the family, and he was the mole to our two boys. Of two things about Harvey. One, when one went to his surgery, he always had wonderful music playing, classical music. He was a polymath, as you've already heard. The second was as a mole. He came back to check the boys that he had dealt with a few days before. And in the case of one of ours, Hilary put out a notice on our door which read, "Please accept Harvey Brown." We've already, but I want to say something about Harvey in Edgware Dus. He was always an Orthodox Jew, and he was a proud Zionist. And he stayed that way and fulfilled his beliefs when he made Aliyah. He had Shelo Asani Isha, the bracha that men say each morning when they make a treated women in the same way that he treated men. He believed in women's education. The second was Yom Ha'atzmaut. Recently, since the time of Rav Heschel, celebrated Yom Ha'atzmaut. We say Hallel, and I can remember on a few about this, slipped in Hallel with a bracha, although the was that we did not say a bracha.
Michael, I think we're struggling to hear, so I'm gonna mute you. We're gonna go on to Alex.
Okay.
Okay, so Alex Brown is Harvey's youngest son, and I'm going to bring you in, Alex. I've just asked you to unmute and spotlight video.
Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. On behalf of all our family spread out across the world, I wanted to thank you all for what's really been a beautiful and fitting end to our Shloshim, which finished today. We've heard tonight, and we knew from before, but it's served to reinforce it, that communal life, but the Adas in particular. Oops. No, it's nothing. Sorry about that. Sorry, that communal life was really a major part of Dad's life for most of his life. He lived amongst everyone else, so to speak, rather than closing himself off at home. But it was never really the trappings of the community that seemed to appeal to him. It was the people, and it was the people that he was around. And that's comforting, and it's not surprising, but it's comforting to see that love that he had for the community reflected back quite literally 100-fold tonight. And it would be more were it not for the vagaries of Zoom. So I wanted to thank the Rabbi, Stuart, Martin, Ellie, my brother Jeremy, and Michael. I'm sorry we couldn't hear more from you. As well, of course, to Ellie, Daniel, Aaron, and any of the others who made this evening possible. I hope that we can all meet again in happier times. I just wanted to end, if possible, by just reflecting that we've just moved home. And when unpacking recently, I found a picture that was in pride of place in our old home, and will be so once we find wherever pride of place will be in our new home. I don't know if anyone can see it. If I hold it up to the camera, I don't know how well that comes out. So it's been a little hard recently to remember Dad as he was, particularly for my family in Israel, who saw him a lot more than I had chance to. And it's harder to remember him as he was. And you know this is Dad as he was because there's a I think it's a midrash sitting there with him when he took me to the park. This is Dad as he was, and as I would like to be able to remember him going forwards. And events like tonight bring back just a little bit of his essence and who he really was to our memories. And that is a really nice way to end our Shloshim and to move forwards with trying to remember the good that he did in the world and for our family. And thank you all.
Just want to take the opportunity to firstly thank all the speakers from this evening, to thank Rabbi Lieberman, Martin, Stuart, Jeremy, Ellie, Michael, and Alex. I think, having not known Harvey, I've gained a lot, and my family as a unit gain a lot from the legacy of Harvey. So thank you very, very much for all coming. This will be available, please go on the website, eayc.org, during the next day or so, and please feel free. And thank you very much for coming this evening.